On 23rd of September, the U.S. Commerce Department proposed banning key Chinese software and hardware in so-called connected vehicles. The proposed ban not only affects Chinese EV makers, but also forces other major automakers to remove Chinese components from vehicles before they can enter the U.S. markets. This came just days after the Biden administration locked in a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs and 25% on EV batteries. Meanwhile, a vote by the EU on whether to impose additional tariffs on Chinese EVs was postponed. Why is Chinese EVs facing so much hostility in the West? How can the disputes be resolved? Are trade wars the answer? Welcome to a special edition of The Point, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm Lu Xin. I was joined from UK by the Baron Fetten Issa, whose vast knowledge of China has earned him the title of the Red Baron. And in Beijing, Zhang Gong, Vice President of the University of International Business and Economics, Israel. Let me start with Baron Fetten. You have previously stated that the US has not benefited from the trade war with China. Now, looking at the latest pieces of news, the additional tariff, the 100% tariff, and now this proposed ban on key Chinese software and hardware, do you think the US is launching new trade war or another attack of trade war against Chinese EVs?
It is absolutely normal that you have this competition between these two countries. What I find abnormal is that the US and Europe is using tools which are directly going against the principles of the World Trade Organization. I was an ambassador at the World Trade Organization at the hype of the time when China wanted and did not yet join the WTO, successfully joining in 2001. I was an ambassador in 1996, 1997, and I felt that it was difficult for China to join the WTO, to join this great wave of globalization. But now, actually, China has really embraced globalization. And what is happening now is basically the West is frightened by the fact that WTO is becoming a WTO with Chinese characteristics. That is to say, they are benefiting that China is benefiting more than the West of this globalization trend. And that's the reason why you have this protectionist action in terms of trade or in terms of investment coming from the West. But it's a lost game.
So, Mr. John, before we go on to discuss further, do you agree with Baron Fetten's view that it is the latest wave of the trade war and that China has after 20 years after joining the WTO, has become an advocate of free trade, and the United States and other Western countries have actually been more reluctant to join in the game?
Well, of course I tend to agree, but I want to add more. I think the first trade war started by Donald Trump is really coming from the imbalance aspect of the trade between the United States and China. So he wants to have more exports to China and China to buy more things. Donald Trump was more coming from that angle. But the continued, what we characterize as trade war is actually very different. This is about fighting for technological supremacy. I think, both the United States and China understand very well this great competition, this grand competition as we're facing right now. Is all about technological competition. And I think in the United States right now, there's a wide consensus that the battle about the electric cars and batteries is losing, if not at all, totally lost. They're thinking about this as a losing war, and they have to do something about it. So all these actions and policies are all tailored towards pushing back essentially exports of Chinese electric vehicle exports and also battery exports. I think this is what they're coming from.
Baron Fetten, as to the point of the US is in a war for technological supremacy over China, do you share that perspective?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with John. He is absolutely right. I mean, it's the forefront of the competition, this sort of competitive sort of attitude of the US and European Union. It's not only the US, actually. Is down to technology. And you're absolutely right, John, to mention other. I mean, there are not also only the EV cars and the battery. I mean, the supercomputer, for example. I mean, the microchips. I mean, the microchip, the Chip Act is an obvious element to try to sort of slow down the evolution. There is also, I think, an element of trying to take security as a pretext to slow down certain trade. Because, and it's actually quite, uh, it's a bit of a fallacy. When, for example, I see 3 weeks ago the crane debacle in the States when they do not want to have actually Chinese firms owning sort of crane or installing too many cranes in the ports in the US because they would sort of monitor the military boats from the US. It's ludicrous. I mean, we have satellites. Everybody has got satellites, and we do not need crane to sort of monitor any military ships. Then it's a total fallacy. It's a pretext. Then currently the security issue is being taken as a pretext to limit
So,
certain technological investment or trade. I mean, that's.
yeah.
But there is something which is very important. You have not to confuse high-tech competition with the global trade. The US-China trade has never been going down. Year on year, it's larger and larger and larger. Then for everything else than high-tech, you do have a growing, trade between the US and China. This is something which is extremely important to understand.
The problem is that I think Washington is attributed this success to the wrong factor. They're all thinking about that it's because of the Chinese state intervention, it's because of industrial policy. As a matter of fact, I think they have the wrong interpretation of industrial policy in China. They think that it requires a government intervention, and that's why you're seeing the United States is actually copying all these things. What's being reflected in the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIP Act, the billions and billions of dollars pumped by the federal government into subsidizing private companies. And you see, for example, the mineral security network, where they think, several countries can pool resources to subsidize private enterprises to invest mineral resources around the world. So they're all thinking about this as a result of Chinese government's intervention. But this is actually not true at all. In my view, the success of corporate China in these spaces are mostly attributed to the intense competition in China. And also attribute to Chinese companies' incredibly focused investment in R&D, in developing products, to be competitive in the world. I mean, you look what the world is experiencing today is the spillover effect of intense competition in China.
The trade between China and the United States is actually growing despite the kind of cap the United States wants to put on Chinese technology or software, and despite the additional tariffs that have been imposed by since Trump era.
Well, actually, I'm not as optimistic. I think eventually, the restrictive policies imposed by Washington via tariff and other non-tariff measures will eventually take a toll on Chinese exports to the United States. I think, on one hand, it does show how competitive Chinese products are on the U.S. market, and how resilient Chinese companies have been adjusting to these policy restrictions. But on the other hand, the Washington State Department and Department of Commerce is not going to stand by these numbers not coming down. They will come up with all kinds of things in their toolbox.
Baron Fetten, we have limited time, but I want to get your view. How is this going to develop? Is these trade war going to continue to escalate? Where's the boundary? How are these disputes going to be resolved, if at all?
I first of all, I would like to agree with John concerning the fact that the private economy in China has been really the driver and is the driver for the technology advancement in many areas. I'm myself a member of the board of the largest Chinese battery company, and we've sort of just listed in Nasdaq in New York, and absolutely. But the guidelines, however, of the Chinese Communist Party is helpful, because if you do something which is along the guidelines of the party, then you're likely sort of to succeed. What I feel is what should be done is to try to convince the West to have a more cooperative attitude. That is, so instead of directly, playing the black and white, you need to be slightly more gray and have cooperation. And you can see it's actually sometimes extremely successful with the German companies. The German companies, auto companies, have decided to go and invest into EV cars in China and to organize a cooperation in order that they also benefit from the advancement of the Chinese companies. Then, as a consequence, this is actually the way forward. I think the German way of doing these things should be replicated, not only in the terms of EV cars or batteries, but also in every other technology, as long as it is not obviously serving the military aspect of the game. Because this will never be able to have a cooperation. But otherwise, everything else, I think, can be solved through cooperation.
Do you think, given the kind of apparent paranoia in Washington about China in terms of ideology, in terms of national security, do you think it is possible at all for American car makers to come and
absolutely?
I mean, Tesla, okay. Other American car makers actually have presence in China. They have been producing in China and pumping up the company. But do you think it is possible at all for American companies to follow suit of German companies and invest in China at this time of day?
Yes. As we speak, American firms are coming to China to invest in high technology for this purpose. And I myself, member of the boards of a couple of them. It's not maybe through the Tesla of this world. It's more through investment funds. In fact, it's a little bit more. It's one step behind actually the actual firms.
Yeah, hasn't the U.S.
But it's happening as we speak. It's actually happening.
John, last word, please.
Well, I think we're also talking about a model where America welcomes Chinese companies in cutting-edge technologies to invest and manufacture in the United States. It's actually a voice in the United States advocating that welcome Chinese companies like BYD to go to United States to do manufacture. But the problem is that within Washington, a lot of politicians in Congress just simply cannot accept that. I mean, they're saying, what? You're talking about American companies inviting Chinese companies to Michigan to license their technology? I mean, this is almost like unheard of to them. So, time has really changed, but these people just won't change. I mean, they're stuck in the past. And I think with the current hysterical anti-China political environment within Washington, it is very difficult to think about and do things like this, which is indeed actually in the interest of both countries.